Have you ever been the punchline of a vicious joke played by your own flesh and blood? Chloe thought she was walking into a romantic blind date orchestrated by her twin. Instead, it was a trap designed to completely humiliate her until the city's most feared boss sat down. There is a unique, suffocating kind of pain that comes from being the ugly twin. For Chloe and Jessica Sullivan, the genetic lottery had played a cruel, polarizing trick. Born just 4 minutes apart, they shared the same auburn hair and striking hazel eyes, but that was where the similarities violently ended. Jessica was a pristine size 2, a former high school cheerleader, a current Instagram influencer, and a woman who moved through the world like she owned it. Chloe was fat. She wasn't thick in the trendy, socially acceptable way that the internet praised, nor was she mildly curvy. She was a genuine size 22. For 24 years, she had existed entirely in Jessica's shadow, known to their Boston suburb only as Jessica's bigger sister. While Jessica spent her weekends at exclusive clubs in the Seaport district, Chloe stayed in her modest Cambridge apartment, working as a freelance data analyst and escaping into romance novels. Chloe had long ago made peace with her body, finding comfort in her own skin. But the world, and specifically her twin sister, never let her forget that she didn't fit the mold. Jessica's cruelty was rarely outright. It was insidious. It was the backhanded compliments, the exaggerated sighs when Chloe ordered a carbohydrate at family dinners, and the constant, suffocating pity. So when Jessica showed up at Chloe's apartment on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, holding 2 iced lattes and a deceptively sweet smile, Chloe's guard immediately went up. "I have a surprise for you," Jessica announced, dropping her designer bag onto Chloe's worn sofa. "You're going on a date this Friday." Chloe froze, her fingers hovering over her laptop keyboard. "Jessica, no. You know I don't do blind dates, not after the last time." "Oh, come on, Chloe. That was college. We were kids." Jessica waved her perfectly manicured hand dismissively. "This is different. My new boyfriend, Brad Harding, has a cousin who just moved to the city. His name is Liam. He's 26, he's an architect, and Brad says he specifically loves bigger girls, like he prefers them. He saw a picture of us from Mom's birthday, and he practically begged Brad to set it up." Chloe felt a dangerous, terrifying flutter of hope in her chest. She tried to squash it. "He saw a picture of me, and he wanted to go out with me." "Yes," Jessica beamed, reaching out to squeeze Chloe's hand. "Look, I know I've been a lot. Sometimes. I just want you to be happy. You deserve a good guy. Please just say yes. I even booked a table for 2 at the Glass Orchid for 7 p.m. The Glass Orchid was one of the most exclusive, expensive restaurants in downtown Boston. It was the kind of place where businessmen sealed million-dollar deals and celebrities hid from paparazzi. The gesture seemed too grand, too thoughtful for Jessica. But looking into her twin's eyes, Chloe saw what she thought was genuine sisterly affection. Against her better judgment, the lonely, hopeful part of Chloe surrendered. "Okay, I'll go." The next 3 days were a whirlwind of anxious preparation. Chloe spent a reckless amount of her savings on a deep emerald green velvet wrap dress. It clung to her curves beautifully, highlighting her waist and draping elegantly over her hips. She spent 2 hours doing her hair, letting soft, romantic curls fall over her shoulders, and applied her makeup with a trembling, careful hand. Looking in the mirror before she called her Uber, Chloe felt something rare and fragile. She felt beautiful. When she arrived at the Glass Orchid, The maitre d' looked her up and down with a thinly veiled expression of judgment, but upon hearing the reservation name, he led her to a highly visible booth right in the center of the dining room. The restaurant was a masterpiece of modern luxury, dimly lit by blown glass chandeliers, with soft jazz playing beneath the low hum of wealthy patrons conversing. Chloe sat down, smoothed her green velvet dress, and ordered a sparkling water. 7 p.m. came and went. By 7:15 p.m., Chloe was compulsively checking her phone. No messages from Jessica. By 7:30 p.m., the waiter came by with a pitying smile, asking if she wanted to order an appetizer while she waited. Chloe's face burned hot with humiliation. She shook her head, clutching her water glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. The familiar, sickening feeling of rejection began to pool in her stomach. He saw you when he walked in. Her dark thoughts whispered. He saw you, and he left. But the truth was far, far worse than a simple ghosting. At 7:45 p.m., a sudden eruption of loud, frat boy laughter shattered the sophisticated ambiance of the restaurant. Chloe looked up. Walking through the front doors were 4 young men in wrinkled dress shirts and khakis. At the center was Brad Harding, Jessica's boyfriend. Chloe recognized him instantly from Instagram. But he wasn't with an architect named Liam. He was with his golf buddies. And one of them was holding a massive, stuffed pink pig wearing a cheap plastic tiara. Chloe's breath hitched. Her heart slammed against her ribcage like a trapped bird. As the group spotted her sitting alone at the center booth, their laughter doubled. They began walking directly toward her table. Out of the corner of her eye, a flash caught Chloe's attention. Over in a shadowed, secluded corner booth by the bar, 3 women were sitting. One of them lowered her phone, giggling hysterically. It was Jessica. The floor felt like it was dropping out from underneath Chloe. The grand dinner, the expensive restaurant, the architect who loved bigger girls. It was all a theater production. A highly coordinated, public execution of Chloe's dignity. Brad and his friends reached her table. The dining room around them had grown quiet, the wealthy patrons turning to watch the spectacle. "Hey there, Chloe," Brad slurred slightly, clearly having pre-gamed the event at a bar beforehand. "Sorry Liam couldn't make it, but we brought his replacement." The boy holding the stuffed pig slammed it onto the pristine white tablecloth right in front of Chloe. It knocked over her water glass, spilling ice and water all over her beautiful green velvet dress. "Oink oink, Cinderella," one of the other boys jeered loudly. Jessica's laughter echoed from the corner booth, cutting through the silence of the room. Chloe was entirely paralyzed. Tears sprang to her eyes, hot and fast, blurring her vision. She couldn't breathe. The humiliation was so absolute, so suffocatingly heavy, that she couldn't even find the strength to stand up and run. She was frozen in her chair, a public spectacle, the fat, ugly sister proving once again that she was nothing more than a joke. "Oh, look, the pig is crying," Brad mocked, leaning on the table. "Did you really think a guy like my cousin would want a fat—" Brad never finished his sentence. The heavy, soundproof double doors of the glass orchid didn't just open. They were thrust open by 2 massive men in tailored black suits. The already quiet restaurant plunged into a dead, terrified silence. The jazz music abruptly cut off as the bartender scrambled to turn the speakers down. Walking through the doors was a man who seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Lorenzo Moretti. Even Chloe, isolated in her tech bubble, knew the face. You didn't live in this city without knowing who the Moretti family was. They owned the ports, the unions, and a vast majority of the real estate, operating a criminal empire under the guise of venture capitalism. Lorenzo was the newly minted Don, 32 years old, violently handsome, and utterly ruthless. He wore a bespoke midnight blue suit that molded to his broad shoulders. A faint, jagged scar cut through his left eyebrow, making his sharp, predatory dark eyes look even more menacing. Lorenzo did not look at the maitre d'. He did not look at the politicians dining in the back. His dark eyes locked onto the center booth. He walked forward. His two massive enforcers flanked behind him. Brad Harding, noticing the sudden silence, turned around. The smug, drunken sneer melted off his face instantly, replaced by a pale, chalky terror. Lorenzo stopped just inches from Brad. He didn't yell. When he spoke, his voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated with lethal intent. "You are standing at my table," Lorenzo said softly. Brad swallowed hard, taking a trembling step back. I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti. We were just— I don't care what you were just doing," Lorenzo interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the silent room. He glanced down at the stuffed pig on the table, then looked at Chloe. He took in her tear-stained face, her trembling shoulders, and the water soaking her velvet dress. A dark, terrifying shadow crossed his expression. Lorenzo looked back at Brad. "Pick that piece of trash off the table. Then take your friends and walk out of my city. If I see your face in Boston after midnight tonight, they won't find enough of you to bury." Brad snatched the stuffed pig off the table as if it were on fire. The four boys didn't even look back at Jessica. They scrambled over each other, nearly sprinting out of the restaurant in absolute, unadulterated fear. In the corner booth, Jessica had lowered her phone. She was staring, open-mouthed and pale. Lorenzo didn't acknowledge the fleeing boys. He pulled out a spotless silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and gently, almost reverently, handed it across the table to Chloe. "Dry your tears, Mia Bella," Lorenzo said, his voice entirely different now, smooth, warm, and strictly focused on her. "A woman should never ruin her makeup for boys who still drink cheap beer." Chloe took the handkerchief with trembling fingers, too stunned to speak. She dabbed her eyes, staring up at the terrifying Mafia boss who had just single-handedly saved her from the worst moment of her life. Lorenzo didn't walk away. Instead, he unbuttoned his suit jacket and smoothly slid into the empty seat across from her. The seat meant for her fake date. He snapped his fingers once. The maitre d' practically materialized at his side, sweating profusely. "Clear this wet tablecloth," Lorenzo ordered without looking at the man. "Bring us your best vintage Barolo, the Wagyu appetizers, and send someone to the boutique next door to fetch a cashmere wrap for the lady. She is cold." "Right away, Don Moretti," the maitre d' squeaked, vanishing instantly. Chloe finally found her voice. It was a pathetic, shaky whisper. What are you doing?" Lorenzo leaned forward, folding his large, ring-adorned hands on the table. The dark, dangerous aura around him seemed to soften just for her. He looked at her with an intensity that made her toes curl in her heels. "I came here to collect a debt from the owner," Lorenzo said, casually, his eyes lazily tracing the curve of her jaw, the fullness of her lips, and the soft, beautiful shape of her body in the velvet dress. "But then I saw a group of dead men harassing the most beautiful woman in this restaurant. So I decided my schedule had opened up." He tilted his head, a devastating, genuine smirk playing on his lips. "I'm Lorenzo, and unless you have somewhere else to be, I believe we are on a date." The waiter returned in record time, swapping out the wet tablecloth with the frantic speed of a man defusing a bomb. Moments later, a breathless boutique assistant scurried into the restaurant and draped a heavenly soft black cashmere wrap over Chloe's shivering shoulders. The vintage Barolo was poured, and for the first time in her 24 years, Chloe was the undisputed center of the universe. Lorenzo Moretti did not treat her like a charity case. He didn't treat her like a fetish or a curiosity either. He treated her like a queen holding court. Over plates of seared wagyu and truffle risotto, he asked her about her data analytics work, genuinely listening as she nervously explained her predictive algorithms. When she spoke, his dark, dangerous eyes never drifted. They remained entirely fixed on her face, occasionally dropping to admire the swell of her cleavage against the emerald velvet or the soft curve of her waist. "You hide yourself," Lorenzo observed, his deep voice slicing through the ambient noise of the restaurant. He took a slow sip of his wine. "Why?" Chloe looked down at her hands, the old insecurities bubbling up. "Look at me, Lorenzo. I don't exactly fit the Boston elite mold. In my family, I'm the before picture. Jessica is the after." A low, menacing growl vibrated in Lorenzo's chest. "Your sister is a hollow piece of glass. Pretty to look at, but empty inside, easily shattered. You." He reached across the table, his calloused thumb gently tracing the soft fullness of her cheek, "are a masterpiece, breathtaking. Soft where a woman should be soft, sharp where a woman should be sharp. The fact that the men in this city have been too blind to worship you is a failure on their part, not yours." Chloe's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her with such raw, unfiltered hunger. Across the dining room, the shock in the corner booth had finally worn off, replaced by a toxic, boiling jealousy. Jessica Sullivan could not comprehend what she was witnessing. Her fat, ugly sister was supposed to be weeping in an Uber by now. Instead, she was being romanced by the most powerful, untouchable billionaire in New England. The narrative in Jessica's head was breaking. Unable to control her narcissism, Jessica stood up. She smoothed down her microscopic designer dress, tossed her auburn extensions over her shoulder, and sauntered toward their center booth, wearing her most seductive, camera-ready smile. "Excuse me," Jessica purred, stopping right next to Lorenzo's chair. She aggressively ignored Chloe, focusing entirely on the Mafia boss. "I couldn't help but notice you saved my sister from that awful prank. I'm Jessica. I just wanted to personally thank you, Mr. Moretti." She leaned forward deliberately, offering him a plunging view of her chest. "Maybe I could buy you a drink to show my gratitude." Chloe shrank back into the booth, the familiar weight of her sister's shadow threatening to consume her. This was how it always happened. Jessica wanted it. Jessica took it. Lorenzo didn't even look at Jessica. He continued cutting his steak, his movements methodical and calm. "Matteo," he said softly. One of the massive enforcers standing near the doorway instantly stepped forward. "Yes, boss." "Why is there a rat standing near my table?" Lorenzo asked, taking a bite of his food. He finally turned his head, looking at Jessica with an expression of such absolute, freezing disgust that Jessica physically recoiled. "I specifically asked to dine without the stench of garbage." Jessica's perfectly contoured face flushed a violent, humiliating crimson. I was just—" "I know exactly what you are," Lorenzo interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register. "You set up your own blood for a cheap laugh. You think your face buys you a pass in this world. It doesn't." He wiped his mouth with a napkin and leaned back, his eyes pinning Jessica to the floor. "Your boyfriend, Brad, is currently packing his apartment. By midnight, he'll be gone. As for you, I own the PR firm that manages your little social media career. I own the brands that sponsor your posts. As of tomorrow morning, your contracts are terminated. Your accounts will be flagged and deleted. You are blacklisted from every club, restaurant, and venue I own in this city, which is all of them. Tears of genuine panic welled in Jessica's eyes. You can't do that. Over her? She pointed a shaking finger at Chloe. She's nothing. Lorenzo stood up. The sheer size of him, the terrifying aura of violence that radiated from his frame, made Jessica whimper. She, Lorenzo pointed directly at Chloe, is under my protection. If you ever speak to her disrespectfully again, if you ever even look in her direction with anything less than absolute reverence, deleting your Instagram will be the least of your concerns. Am I clear? Jessica let out a choked sob, turned on her heel, and ran out of the glass orchid, leaving her friends behind. Lorenzo sat back down, immediately softening as he looked at Chloe's stunned face. Now, he smiled gently, picking up his wine glass. Tell me more about this algorithm you built. Over the next 3 months, Chloe's life became unrecognizable. Lorenzo Moretti moved with the swift, unstoppable force of a hurricane. He didn't just date her. He consumed her life in the most intoxicating way possible. He sent a black town car to drive her to work every day. Her modest apartment was constantly overflowing with extravagant bouquets of dark red roses and boxes of imported Italian pastries. But it wasn't just his wealth that won her over. It was his absolute devotion. Lorenzo worshipped her body. In the privacy of his sprawling penthouse overlooking the harbor, he stripped away decades of her insecurities. He would spend hours trailing kisses over the soft curve of her stomach, the lush swell of her hips, and the thick, beautiful line of her thighs. He made her feel sexy, powerful, and utterly divine. For the first time in her life, Chloe wasn't apologizing for taking up space. Lorenzo demanded that she take up more of it. But in the background, a wounded snake was cornered, and a cornered snake always strikes. Stripped of her influencer status, dumped by Brad, and exiled from Boston's high society, Jessica was drowning in debt and bitterness. Her entire identity had been tied to being better than Chloe, and now Chloe was practically the queen of the city. Jessica's jealousy mutated into pure, unadulterated venom. If she couldn't have her life back, she was going to destroy Chloe's. Jessica knew Lorenzo was a dangerous man, so she started digging into the dark web of Boston's underworld. She found a name: Vincent Castellano. He was the head of a rival faction from Rhode Island, a bitter enemy of the Moretti family, who had been trying to gain a foothold in Boston's seaports for years. Desperate and delusional, Jessica reached out to Vincent's men. She arranged a secret meeting in a dingy diner on the outskirts of the city, bringing a folder of printed photographs she had stalked from a distance. Chloe leaving Lorenzo's penthouse, Chloe getting into his private car, the specific routes her driver took. Moretti has a weakness, Jessica told Vincent, sliding the photos across the sticky diner table. My sister. He's obsessed with her. If you take her, you have Lorenzo by the throat. He'll give you the ports. He'll give you whatever you want. Vincent Castellano, an older, scarred man with cold, dead eyes, looked at the photos and smirked. And what do you want in return, little girl? $50,000, Jessica demanded coldly. And I want you to make sure Lorenzo knows it was my sister's fault. Ruin her for him. Deal, Vincent said, pocketing the photos. The trap was set for a Thursday evening. Chloe was finishing up a late project at her office building. Lorenzo was supposed to be in a meeting with the union bosses. As Chloe walked out to the underground parking garage, pulling her coat around her soft curves, she noticed her usual town car was missing. Instead, a black van was idling near the exit. 4 men stepped out of the van. They didn't wear suits. They wore dark street clothes, and they moved with practiced, terrifying speed. Chloe's heart stopped. She turned to run back toward the elevator, but 2 men were already behind her, cutting off her escape. "Don't scream, sweetheart," one of the men sneered, pulling a zip tie from his pocket. "You're coming with us to take a little ride to Rhode Island." Tears pricked Chloe's eyes, panic seizing her chest. She had finally found happiness, and now she was going to be used as a pawn to destroy the man she loved. But as the man reached out to grab her arm, the screech of tires echoed through the concrete garage. 2 armored SUVs tore around the corner, slamming the brakes and boxing the van in completely. Before Vincent's men could even draw their weapons, the doors of the SUVs flew open. Matteo and 6 of Lorenzo's heavily armed enforcers poured out, assault rifles raised and aimed squarely at the kidnappers' heads. The garage fell dead silent. The man who had reached for Chloe slowly raised his hands, dropping the zip tie to the floor. From the shadows behind the SUVs, footsteps echoed. Slow, deliberate, and heavy with impending violence. Lorenzo stepped into the harsh fluorescent light of the garage. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. He wore a dark leather jacket, his eyes blacker than the night, his face a terrifying mask of lethal fury. He walked straight past the men holding the guns, pulling Chloe into his massive chest. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in her scent, ensuring she was unharmed. "You're okay, amore mio," he whispered against her temple, his large hand gently stroking her back. "I have you. I'm right here." Chloe sobbed into his jacket, clutching his shirt tightly. They tried to take me." "I know," Lorenzo murmured, kissing her forehead. He turned his head, his eyes locking onto Vincent's men. "Matteo, put these dogs in the van. Take them to the warehouse. I'll deal with them personally." As his men dragged the struggling kidnappers away, Lorenzo pulled a burner phone from his pocket. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. "Did you get her?" Jessica's frantic, eager voice crackled through the speaker. "Do you have Chloe?" Chloe froze, her blood turning to ice. Her own twin sister, her own flesh and blood, had sold her out to the Mafia to be kidnapped, or worse. The ultimate betrayal. "Hello, Jessica," Lorenzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm. A sharp gasp echoed on the other end of the line, followed by dead silence. "Did you really think," Lorenzo continued, his voice echoing in the empty garage, "that the Dawn of Boston wouldn't have every single phone line, text message, and email associated with my woman's family monitored? I knew about your meeting with Vincent before you even ordered your coffee at that diner." "Lorenzo, please," Jessica began to beg, her voice cracking with sheer terror. I gave you mercy the first time because you share her face," Lorenzo interrupted coldly. "I will not make that mistake twice. My men are currently standing outside your apartment door. You have a passport, and you have exactly whatever fits in the duffel bag they hand you. There is a private plane waiting at the airfield. It will drop you in a very cold, very remote village in Eastern Europe. If you ever try to contact Chloe again, if you ever step foot on American soil again, you will cease to exist. Goodbye, Jessica." He hung up the phone and crushed it under his leather boot. Chloe stood trembling, the reality of her sister's fate crashing down on her. But when she looked up into Lorenzo's eyes, she didn't see a monster. She saw a protector, a man who had just burned down the world to keep her safe. He cupped her face, wiping a stray tear with his thumb. She will never hurt you again. No one will ever hurt you again. Why? Chloe whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Why go to all this trouble for me? Lorenzo smiled, dropping to one knee right there on the oil-stained concrete of the parking garage. He reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a velvet box. He snapped it open, revealing a breathtaking emerald-cut diamond ring that caught the harsh garage lights and shattered them into rainbows. "Because you are not a joke, Chloe," Lorenzo said, his voice echoing with absolute sincerity. "You are my queen. You are the only woman who has ever made this dark world feel light. I want your brilliant mind. I want your beautiful, perfect body, and I want your soul for the rest of my life." He looked up at her, his dark eyes pleading. "Marry me, Mia Bella. Let me spend the rest of my days showing you exactly how a goddess should be worshipped." Chloe looked at the ring, then at the scarred, dangerous, fiercely loving man kneeling before her. The ugly, fat sister, who was supposed to be the punchline of a cruel joke, had just won the entire world. Tears of pure joy spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes. Yes, Lorenzo." He slid the ring onto her finger, standing up to capture her lips in a deep, bruising kiss that promised a lifetime of protection, passion, and absolute devotion. Did Chloe's ultimate revenge and Lorenzo's fierce protection leave you completely breathless? If you loved this dramatic mafia romance and want more intense, real-life storytelling where the underdog finally gets the crown she deserves, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a good plot twist, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, jaw-dropping stories every single week. What would you do in Chloe's shoes? Comment below.